PA seeks to engage with the respective line ministries of the government to see how we could engage professionally, providing our input, professional input in various endeavors of the government and to be a collaborative partner. So in that process, we have this Meet the Minister program that had started quite some time back. So I wish to welcome each and every one of you who are present physically and who are joining online and also joining through other social media channels to this program. And I would like to invite each and every one of you to engage with the Minister on any other questions you have on matters of interest. And with that introduction, I would like to, without taking much time, since the Minister also indicated to me that he has another commitment and he wished to conclude this session by 7:30, I would like to invite the Honourable Minister to start off with a brief presentation or a speech, and then open it for discussion and Q&A from the members who are present here. And those members who are joining online, we would be getting their questions in the form of a Q&A, which I would be able to then pose to you, sir. Over to you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dulita Pereira, President of the OPA, Engineer Upali Jayawardena, the General Secretary of the OPA, and ladies and gentlemen, I'm very happy to have the opportunity of addressing you this evening. I'm no stranger to these surroundings. I used to spend quite a lot of time here in my previous incarnation as Dean of the Faculty of Law of the University of Colombo and as Vice Chancellor of that university. In fact, I think I have the unique distinction of having been the chief guest at the induction of 3 successive presidents of the OPA during 3 consecutive years. So at that time I was very active in your deliberations, assisting in policy formulation, especially with regard to matters relating to the Constitution and the legal system and similar matters. So I'm happy to revisit these congenial surroundings. Now I thought it might interest you to listen to some thoughts of mine on current happenings with regard to my own area of responsibility, foreign affairs. I will speak to you succinctly about some of the developments that occurred recently during the 49th session of the Human Rights Council in Geneva, which concluded a couple of weeks ago. The follow-up to that, for instance, the proceedings in the Parliament of Sri Lanka yesterday, where we enacted the Prevention of Terrorism Act amending bill. Several other very crucial events taking place this week and next week. Today we had a very distinguished visitor from the United States of America, Her Excellency Victoria Nuland, the Under Secretary of State for Political Affairs in the US State Department. Tomorrow we have 5 senior members of the Senate of the French Republic visiting our country. And on Friday, on the day after tomorrow, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa is having discussions, the first of a series with the Tamil National Alliance. Today, in fact, I was not able to attend that because I was busy the whole morning and early afternoon with Her Excellency Victoria Nuland. But the all-party conference also had their deliberations today. Now, with regard to the 49th session of the Human Rights Council, I think you as professionals should certainly take an interest in the substance of the discussions that took place in Geneva and the implications of those discussions, the fallout from that and the trajectory for the future. I don't know how familiar you are with the format and the proceedings of the Human Rights Council. By resolution 46/1, the Human Rights Council by majority, that was a decision by a divided council, they made a decision to empower the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Her Excellency Michelle Bachelet, to set up an ad hoc mechanism under her office to gather, collect and analyze evidence in respect of Sri Lanka, with a view to using this evidence before international tribunals and in courts purporting to exercise what is known as universal jurisdiction. In September last year, that is just after I had assumed office for the second time, I was Foreign Minister from 2010 to 2015, and I was reappointed Foreign Minister in August last year. In September last year, that is in September 2021, we had a meeting of the Human Rights Council at which the High Commissioner presented an oral report on Sri Lanka. This time, in March 2022, the High Commissioner presented not an oral but a written report. And when she presents a written report, there are two things that happen thereafter. One is a discussion at what is called the high-level segment, at which foreign ministers of countries are present, and thereafter there is an interactive dialogue. So I had two opportunities to speak. At the high-level segment, foreign ministers are allowed 7 minutes, and at the interactive dialogue, if it concerns their own countries, they are allowed 5 minutes. Sri Lanka's case, basically at the international level, several things. One is, now I would ask you to listen and to see whether these arguments are convincing to an independent professional audience. I think that is valuable, not from a partisan political standpoint, but as professionals with a considerable reservoir of expertise, how you would react to what I am about to say. Because this captures the gist, the essence of what I said in Geneva, both publicly and in my own discussions in private with Michelle Bachelet, the Human Rights Commissioner. Now these were some of the arguments. Look at the state of the contemporary world. We seem to be on the cusp of a major war. The situation in the Ukraine, which appears to be escalating. There were 81 Sri Lankans in Ukraine when the hostilities started. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs facilitated arrangements for them to be taken to other European countries. Many of them went to Germany and to Poland, a few to Moldova. But right now, as I speak to you, there are about 27 Sri Lankans left behind in the Ukraine out of their own choice. They have jobs there, they are married there, they don't want to leave. But Ukraine is being looked after by our embassy in Ankara, Turkey. There is a 24-hour hotline. I'm in constant touch with our ambassador in Turkey, Ambassador Hassan. So we have a direct interest in the safety of our own people in the Ukraine. Every day in the media, there is reference to the very distressing situation in the Ukraine in terms of the loss of human life, human suffering, the destruction of heritage sites, historical artifacts, Kyiv is the capital of Ukraine, is a treasure trove of ancient buildings, very beautiful. I've been there. So that is the state of the modern world. After the Second World War, Europe has never experienced a period of comparable turmoil. Up to now, there are almost 3 million refugees who have left Kyiv and whose lives are beyond imagination in terms of misery. Now, in that situation, is it at all reasonable to focus on Sri Lanka and to spend this degree of time, attention and energy on our country? Are we a nuisance to anybody? We are living peacefully, minding our own business, not in any sense at all a burden on any other country in the world. So, in such a troubled situation, is it rational, is it logical to focus on Sri Lanka in this manner? Is there any kind of correlation between the situation and the response? Is it proportionate? If it is grotesquely disproportionate, then we need to ask ourselves, what is the reason for this? Has it anything to do with the well-being of the people of Sri Lanka, or is it directly related to the fortunes of politics and politicians in other countries? Now, it has been my empirical experience that there is a direct relation between the influence of the diaspora in any country and the degree of intrusion that that country wants with regard to the domestic affairs of Sri Lanka. In other words, countries with a strong diaspora, a diaspora that is powerful in terms of numbers, electoral strength, organizational strength, financial capability, diaspora immensely powerful in some countries. Now, those are the countries that are relentlessly pursuing Sri Lanka at the international level. We have foreign leaders addressing the Tamil diaspora in the Tamil language at the highest levels of government in those countries. So, isn't that the true explanation why Sri Lanka is getting this degree of attention in a situation where there are other countries that are crying out for immediate attention? So that's the first point I made. Then the second point I made was, see, if the report of the High Commissioner is a public document, so you can read it. And I would ask some of you actually to read it. It's not very long. It's 17 pages in length. Now, if you care to have a look at it, it will be obvious to you that about 80-85% of the contents of that report have nothing whatsoever to deal with war crimes, genocide, anything that is alleged to have happened in the closing stages of the war, which ended on the 9th of May, on the 15th of May, I think, 2009. Nothing whatever to do with the war, allegations of war crimes and so on. No. 85% of it is concerned with domestic issues in this country, internal issues. Constitutional reform, the balance of power between the central parliament and provincial councils, the propriety or impropriety of appointments made to the high echelons of the administrative service or the armed forces and the police. Now, these are the matters that are dealt with in the report of the High Commissioner. Right? Is that satisfactory? Is that the business of the Human Rights Council or the High Commissioner? See, the Human Rights Council is what in law is known as a tribunal of limited jurisdiction. That is, its parameters, the boundaries of its authority are clearly defined. The Human Rights Council derives its authority from the General Assembly of the United Nations in New York. And the Human Rights Council at all times must act within the scope that is allotted to them by the General Assembly. It is no part of the legitimate functions of the Human Rights Council to pass judgment on the internal affairs of member states. If you start doing that, where would you stop? Right? Then what is the function of the parliaments of those countries? I told you 80% of the report deals with internal issues. Those internal issues are matters to be decided, rightly or wrongly, that's a different matter, by the parliament and the people of Sri Lanka. There is absolutely no warrant or justification for intervention in those matters by any external body. That is directly contrary to the culture of the United Nations system and to the letter and the spirit of the law that governs the functioning of the UN system. So now that was my second point. Right? I'm giving you a gist of what I said in Geneva. That's my second point. The third point is, if the Human Rights Council and the High Commissioner start doing this, right, there are 196 countries that are members of the United Nations. Will the High Commissioner feel comfortable carrying out this kind of inquisitorial procedure? It's an inquisition. Will she, in her remotest thoughts, contemplate this kind of inquisition in respect of the domestic affairs of other countries? Definitely not. You can imagine what the reaction would be. Under President Donald Trump, the United States walked out of the Human Rights Council. And very strong language was used to condemn the Human Rights Council. The US ambassador at that time said the Human Rights Council has nothing to do with ethics or morality. It is naked political prejudice. Having said that, the Trump administration stormed out of the Human Rights Council. Why? Because now these are double standards. Sri Lanka is fair game. Our internal affairs can be investigated by special bodies that are set up specifically for that purpose. We challenge that whole procedure. The Human Rights Council is not supposed to name and shame particular countries, pointing the finger at countries that are deliberately chosen, singled out. That is certainly not in accordance with the law and custom of the United Nations. Then the next point was, what about the colossal expenditure that is involved in this exercise? There is an investigative unit that is set up under the office of the High Commissioner to gather evidence on Sri Lanka, to analyze that evidence and prepare for judicial proceedings in international tribunals. This is an exercise that is costing millions and millions of dollars. And the High Commissioner's office recruits and appoints a certain number of officials to carry out this investigation. The salaries that are paid to those officials, those salaries are mind-boggling, even by Western standards. Huge sums of money. So this is becoming a way of life, a business. There are people who live off this. This has become a career. Somebody said that poverty alleviation is today a major business. So this business of the UN setting up committees to investigate other countries, serving themselves very generously, allocating money which they distribute among themselves. Is this at all justifiable in a situation where 1/2 of humankind is struggling to obtain access to life-saving vaccines? half the world's population has not had even one vaccine. In that situation, the limited resources that are available are being expended on ventures like this, which entail no benefit whatsoever to the human community. Right? And the last point I made was, far from conferring any benefit, isn't it doing real harm? Isn't it doing real harm? It is doing real harm both internationally and locally. Internationally it is doing harm because every 6 months you have this drama that is enacted. Resolution is brought, vote is taken, who is for, who is against, who is in the middle. And many countries have told me in private they are exhausted with this exercise. They have nothing against Sri Lanka. Many of these countries have sound trade relations with our country. And there is a spirit of cordiality pervading Sri Lanka's relationship with these countries. They do not want to be driven into a position where they are compelled to vote aye or nay. Many of them take the line of least resistance and abstain from voting. But there's a sense of fatigue, and they don't feel that this is getting us anywhere, exercise in futility. So that is the situation at the international level. Within this country, what happens? There is polarization. Polarization, see, reconciliation means bringing people together. You leave behind you the pain and the anguish of the past. Reconciliation is a cathartic exercise. Catharsis. The word catharsis in Greek means purging, purging of the soul. Very painful. You have lost your beloved ones. It could be a spouse, it could be a child. But that's irrevocable. It has happened, and nobody can bring your loved ones back to life. It's then a question of coming to terms with a difficult situation and having the fortitude and the resolve to go on with your life. Is that in any way assisted by this kind of disruptive exercise, which will introduce acrimony and rancor, divide communities, revive painful memories, resuscitate old hatreds? So, if that is the result, then is this expenditure justifiable by any criterion whatsoever? Now, I have given you in a nutshell the points that I made in my interventions on behalf of the government and indeed the people of Sri Lanka in Geneva. Now, what followed was humbling and encouraging. There were 45 countries that participated in the interactive dialogue. That is optional. Any country that wishes to speak on a report that has been submitted about any country has to submit its name. And the list closes 10 minutes after the discussion commences on that country. So 45 countries had expressed a desire to speak on Sri Lanka, and 32 out of 45 countries said publicly that they find my arguments convincing, and they do not see any reason why Sri Lanka should continue to be pursued inexorably, relentlessly in this manner. So that was very satisfying. These were public statements made on the floor of the Human Rights